Hey, it's Alan. I get asked all the time, how exactly does Kadima help people? There are three primary ways. One, we provide one-on-one personalized career coaching with a focus on getting you a great job. Two, we provide an online do-it-yourself course where you can work at your own pace. Three, if you have a job offer, we'll help you negotiate for more. So to find out about these great services and everything else that we offer at Kadima, sign up for our newsletter. Go to SYCKpodcast.com. That's SYCK podcast.com. I promise you, it'll be the best newsletter to accelerate your career. Thanks a lot.
Live from Brooklyn, welcome to the SYCK Podcast, starring Alan Stein, where he steers your career with Kadima. Along with Alan, I'm Russ Reba, and the episode you've been waiting for, SYCK Tricks. And this week, you get to see more evidence that LinkedIn is a beast when it comes to setting standards in the social media space. And I say that because, Alan, you met our next guest and so many other of your connections on LinkedIn, but without it, we would not have this interview with Margaret.
That's true, Russ. Pretty much all my friends I meet nowadays are on LinkedIn. And Margaret I met there, and she has a tremendous background of recruiting at Microsoft, VMware, Expedia, and others. And similar to me, she separates a lot of the BS processes that don't move the needle and instead gives you real advice that generate real results. So this is going to be a great episode.
All right, so let's get into SYCK Tricks with Margaret.
I am super excited to have on this SYCK podcast, Margaret Buj, who I met on LinkedIn. I saw her present, I think, on YouTube and some other areas where she was giving advice on interview coaching. I looked at her profile on LinkedIn and I was totally amazed by the vast experience that she has had as a recruiter, working for companies, working for outsourced recruiting companies. And I reached out to Margaret. We forged a friendship, and I've learned so much from my time with Margaret. So before I spoil all of your amazing background, Margaret, I'd love for you to tell the SYCK podcast audience a little bit about you and your experience in recruiting and interview knowledge and all your insight in talent acquisition.
Well, firstly, thank you so much for having me on your podcast. I'm very honored. As you said, I have actually 17 years of very international recruitment experience, including 16 years of working as an in-house recruiter, mostly for large US organizations, but I've also worked for mid-size tech companies and for tech startups, Series A, B, and C. During that time, I have recruited for companies such as TIBCO, VMware, Expedia, Yieldify, Typeform, Box, King, and now I'm at a SaaS company called Mixmax, which is based in San Francisco. But during that time, I've recruited very internationally and across all different functions. I think I've recruited for every single function within the business. I've done a lot of engineering recruitment and data and product and marketing. I think I've done 10 years of marketing recruitment, sales recruitment, customer success, finance, strategy, like you name it, I've done it in different organizations. So I've recruited at various levels and also in many different countries. While most of the work was in Europe and I've recruited in most countries in Europe, I've done quite a significant amount of recruitment in the US in a few of my positions, including in the current position. So I have quite a lot of experience in the US market as well.
Awesome. And where are you from in the world and where are you calling in from right now?
So I am originally from Poland. I have been, however, living in London for over 20 years. So London is home, and that's where I'm based right now.
Great. And why I was really excited to have you on the podcast is I work with a lot of clients. I work with a lot of people who are trying to get noticed by companies and great companies. Some of the companies that you're talking about that you've worked at, you mentioned VMware. I think you were there for a few years.
Yeah.
You worked at Box, King, Typeform, Mixmax, Business Objects, TIBCO, the who's who of software and technology. And I think you have about like 15 or 17 years of recruiting experience.
Yeah, it is 17 years. I forgot to mention also 16 years of interview coaching experience. So as an interview coach, I've worked with people across all different sectors, but many people in the tech sector, helping them get the jobs and promotions they wanted, including tech companies such as Amazon or Facebook, but also across many different sectors.
Awesome. So in today's conversation, we'll talk about two different stages of helping people accelerate their career. The first part is getting noticed. And as a recruiter, you're often the gatekeeper of selecting talent. Here we go with SYCK trick number 1. So talk a little bit about what your role is, or what the role is of a recruiter or a talent acquisition person. Like what your role is, what your goal on, what your success measures are as a recruiter at these esteemed companies.
Absolutely. So different companies have different metrics or different targets, but in general, as a recruiter, my job is to identify and find candidates for open positions. And, I look after the whole process from identifying them, the headhunting bit, because in most of these organizations, you get quite a lot of good applications via the website. So these are the active candidates, but also most recruiters use LinkedIn Recruiter to find passive candidates, LinkedIn Recruiter and many different sources. So a lot of my job is actually identifying the best candidates in the market for open positions, then persuading them to join the company, interviewing them, arranging further interviews, and then the salary negotiation. So that's typically what the process, what the role of a recruiter would be. Of course, there's quite a lot involved. There's a lot of market intelligence and finding people in specific markets, in specific countries, at specific levels. Then, being able to understand, being able to interview them, being able to assess which candidate has the right skills, presenting the shortlist to the hiring manager. Typically, the hiring manager will interview between 5 to 10 candidates, depending on the position. And then some of them will go through to the further interview stages. And then, of course, salary negotiation, providing feedback to candidates and all of that stuff. In terms of what we are, recruiters typically are being like different company. I didn't actually have goals in every single company. When I was at Expedia, we had quite a lot. We had to make a certain number of hires. I think it was 5 every month. There was a certain, time to hire. So we were measured on the time to hire, the source of hire. Of course, the more candidates you can hire directly versus using agencies, the better and cheaper as well for the company. So time to hire, time to fill, candidate satisfaction, hiring manager satisfaction, and also the number of hires per month. But, it's not just about the numbers. It's also about the quality of hires, because you want to make sure that the people you hire will stay with the organization for a long time to come.
Yeah, great. And you mentioned 2 different aspects of a recruiter. One, you're proactively sourcing candidates. So you're looking on LinkedIn probably, and we'll dig into that.
Yeah.
And another one, passively. So you get, especially at a lot of these attractive companies, they post roles, and I'm sure there's a lot of incoming interest for those roles.
Well, yes and no. You'll be surprised because, there will be positions where you will get a lot of applications. And when I think of marketing roles, when I think of finance positions, yes, you will get a lot of applications. But I have to say, a lot of these companies, what they are looking for is quite specific. So sometimes you might receive a lot of applications, but actually not many of them will be a fit for what the hiring manager is looking for. And sometimes these companies will have such niche positions that there are hardly any applications. And as a recruiter, you really need to go to the market and try to find someone. Just to give you one example, when I was at Expedia, I was once recruiting for a finance director. And the CFO really wanted someone with e-commerce experience. And I remember I've received 176 direct applications. That was before I even went to the market. And out of these 176 applications, there were just 3 people who had e-commerce experience. I would say out of these 176, maybe half, I would say, were good candidates who had a good stable career history and good companies, but he really wanted that e-commerce experience. So I really wish it was so easy that you just receive applications, then you need to pick the best application. It happens. For some roles, it happens. I am recruiting for a content marketing specialist role, inundated with applications, 168 in 2 days. So it's just a matter of going through them and finding the best people. But it's honestly not that easy. For a lot of these positions, especially in engineering, you are the one who will go to the market, need to find the candidates, approach them, find an interesting way of approaching them, compelling way of approaching them, and then encouraging to speak with you and then hopefully taking them through the process. So it's definitely not as easy as just accepting applications just because it's a good company. And I have worked for companies, obviously startups that are maybe less known, like Mixmax, but even in well-known organizations like VMware and Expedia, it's really not quite as easy as you seem, because a lot of these positions are really quite specialized. So even if there's a lot of interest, doesn't mean that these applications are suitable.
And you mentioned, I think you were looking for a content specialist now, and within a couple of days, you got us 168 applications in very quickly. I often tell people that it's critical, if you are applying reactively to a job posting, to get your application in there quickly. Tell me about when you look at incoming applications, and it sounds like there's a lot of noise there because you were talking about numbers 170 and you only had a few people that were actually qualified. That's not normal.
Content roles seem to attract that. I recruited once for a content role at Expedia. It was quite similar. It's not, I wouldn't say it's a normal number of applications for a role.
SYCK trick number 2 is getting your application in quickly. How long would you wait, basically, like when you post a role until you wait for incoming applications to come in before you start looking for other resources? So because I generally tell people to get their application in within a week or two, because after that, as a recruiter, they're often no longer going to be looking at the active incoming. It's probably going to tail off to a degree, but is it important for people to get their application in quickly, or am I off with that?
Yes, I would say it's very important to try to get your application quickly, because if your application is suitable, recruiter wants to fill the position as quickly as possible. The hiring manager wants to fill the position as quickly as possible. It's typically like the sooner the better. So if you get your application in sooner, you stand a higher chance that you will be interviewed if you are suitable for the position, of course. And if you apply 2 weeks later, I wouldn't say that I would still be checking every single application. I have to say, maybe it's like a myth that, it's just that recruiters don't, that it's just the ATS picking the best candidates. I mean, the ATS has that. You can use ATS for that, applicant tracking system, but every recruiter I know in the companies I've worked for, we would still look at every single application on the system. However, if you apply 2 to 3 weeks later, chances are that we might already be on a final interview stage, or at least in advanced interview process, which means that unless you're like completely outstanding, you just might not be considered, because we might just be waiting, okay, let's see how these interviews go before we get someone else in the process.
External recruiting through LinkedIn and what they look for is SYCK trick number 3. So as a recruiter, you're looking to hire these roles. You're gold on speed and number of roles filled. You talked about at Expedia, you had to fill 5 roles a month and things of that nature. So you're getting incoming applications, and then you're also looking externally. So when you're looking externally for candidates, how do you look for candidates? Like, I'm assuming you're using LinkedIn, maybe some other methods, but is it primarily LinkedIn? And how do you find candidates? Like, how do you search? There's 830 million people on LinkedIn. How do you narrow that down?
Of course, it really depends on the position. But yes, LinkedIn Recruiter will be the main way of looking for candidates. It really depends. So just to give you an example, I am actually currently looking for a product marketing manager, and this role can be based anywhere in the US or Canada. So what I'm doing a few different searches on LinkedIn, and that's why it's so important that you have the right keywords and the right titles, because unless you have that, I will not be able to find you. So I can talk to you later what I'm looking for on a resume when I receive it. But in terms of what I'm looking for, so like say this product marketing manager, I will go on LinkedIn. As you know, you've got the advanced search. I will put in the current job title, product marketing manager. And I do a few different searches. So firstly, I am looking ideally from someone from SaaS experience. Right. So that will be, I can maybe try to put several SaaS companies as a company first, and then look for the right title. Or I might just use computer software or internet, or even not have a sector, but have product marketing manager as a title, but then have SaaS in keywords or B2B in keywords, because I need that experience. So I will just pick several keywords of what I need from the job description, and I will add that as a keyword. But for this specific role, I would also, there are so many different filters on LinkedIn. For example, I'm looking for someone, you can look for someone who spent at least 1 year in the current position, because you're right, you can have plenty of different candidates. So I don't want to go through hundreds of profiles of people who have only started the job a month ago. So in the LinkedIn Recruiter, you can look for people with a certain amount of years of experience, or who graduated after a certain year. So for this specific position, I would look for someone who spent at least 1 year in the current position. I'm looking for people with at least 5 to 7 years of experience. You can't always get that because you can just look at the year of graduation, but it just helps narrow down the search. I'm looking for people who have SaaS in their profile someday, and I'm looking for people with that B2B experience. So these actually will be the main things for this position, but it really depends. The more candidates you get, the more you can narrow down the search by using specific keywords, or maybe looking for people with startup experience, which actually will be very useful here as well. The keywords are super, super important. Just making sure that you have your job title is filled in, that you have the right sector, the industry, and just the right keywords. So whatever the keywords are, like if you work, say, in a SaaS sector, make sure, unless you don't want to work in a sector anymore, but if you have that, make sure that it's somewhere on your profile.
It's interesting that you mentioned that with the keywords. And for those that aren't aware, SaaS is an acronym for software as a service. It's basically selling subscription-based software. When I was at Google and Facebook and Salesforce, I would often talk to the recruiter, and they would often ask me when I was working with a recruiter, and you often work with a hiring manager. So the hiring manager is listing the position, and you are working with them to help recruit the talent for that hiring manager. Is that correct?
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
I would often get asked, what sort of companies and backgrounds do you want people to be at? So do you ever look at what companies they come at, or you're looking more for keywords in terms of their
it
titles?
Depends. Yeah, it really depends on the company. Typically, yes. I mean, it really depends on the hiring manager. Typically, most of these large organizations, hiring managers want someone who have worked in a similar type of a company before. Mm-hmm. So it's not just like any company. No, they would actually, like, it doesn't have to be necessarily Facebook or Amazon, although, it's great, but it has to be maybe just a well-recognized company in the industry. So it really depends. Sometimes I will look, if I need someone from a specific company, I will enter the specific company's names to see if I can find someone. For this position at Mixmax, that's actually not necessary. I need someone ideally with SaaS experience, ideally with startup experience. But for some of the other roles, absolutely. I will be just looking for people coming from certain companies. But at the same time, I think sometimes it's a little bit unfair because you could be an amazing candidate who just didn't get a chance to work for those organizations. So I would typically not just do that, because you could be a great candidate from another company I don't think just the best candidates come from this, big tech. Actually, definitely not.
I agree. I think it's just bias in the system and stereotypes. And people also put a lot of weight on schools. And I know plenty of people that didn't even graduate or didn't go to top schools and have been fantastic employees.
So I have worked once for a CEO who only wanted people from top 20 universities in the UK for a role in data. And I can understand for some roles it makes sense, like maybe the more technical positions, but sometimes the requirements do not make sense. So one of the companies I've worked for, maybe I shouldn't mention the name because they should be ashamed, and I hope they've changed it, is that they only wanted people with university degrees for all the positions. Now, I can understand that it's a preference to have someone with a university degree. But I remember the situation we were looking for. It was like a global account manager, really highly paid salesperson. We had this person from IBM, 20 years of experience, high achiever throughout the years, President's Club. Oh no, we can't hire her. They're like, oh, we might not be able to hire her because of a degree. I'm like, you have got to be kidding me. We got an exception for that, but I'm like, I shouldn't have to jump through the hoops to get an exception for this stupid rule, because how does this education matter when this person has 20 years of experience? So yeah, the bias is definitely there. I think it's changed in the last few years, because I've also run the unconscious bias training session in my last company at Typeform. So I think there's just more awareness, but yeah, sometimes the hiring managers have very narrow-minded requirements, and just because someone comes from this well-known company, really not always the best candidate, because I've interviewed plenty of people from these companies, and yeah, sure, they're smart, but they might not be the right person for their specific role that you are recruiting for. And another thing on LinkedIn, so that's what I was looking for when I'm searching for them. But once I'm actually looking at the profile, there are, plenty of other things that I will be looking for, right? So like achievements. Do they have actually any tangible achievements? Of course, the right keywords, but yes, the achievements. I would look at the headline section, like how do they communicate the value they bring to an employer? And yeah, the tangible achievements will be something super important.
SYCK trick number 4, how referrals play into finding a candidate. So as a recruiter, you're trying to fill these roles, you're trying to fill it quickly, you're trying to fill it with good quality, like the right sort of talent that the hiring manager is seeking. You get incoming, you proactively source as well. Talk about referrals and how that plays into the mix as well. Like referrals from either inside the company or others. How do referrals play into you getting your pool of potential candidates?
So firstly, all the companies I've worked for, they have a referral program, and it's always encouraged and reminded, like employees are reminded to try to refer someone for specific positions. I think for a lot of positions, especially I would say the really senior roles, the hiring manager would first, before the job is even advertised, they will talk to the team, they will talk to people in the business. Who do you know who might be a fit for this position? And a lot of these roles, they might not even be if these roles are advertised, it's because maybe they just can't find anyone, internally. So, or they can't find referrals. So I think if you can try to get referred for a position, that can really significantly increase your chances of getting an interview. If someone knows you. At the same time, I would really discourage people from getting random people to refer them, because that's not gonna, I sometimes get contacted by completely random people I have never spoken to before. I've not had any interaction with them, and they're like, can you refer me for this job? I'm like, no, because this is my reputation. So there has to be some relationship built first.
Yes.
I will always help whenever I can. And if someone contacts me on LinkedIn and they have a perfect profile for maybe a role they're actually really interested in, and I know someone in that company, sure, I would absolutely introduce them. But if that's not the case, no, because that's my reputation on the line. But referrals, very important. Now, it doesn't mean that just because you are referred, you will be interviewed, because I also recall receiving plenty of referrals that were completely unsuitable for the position. I was like, how can you even refer this person? Like, they have zero experience that I'm looking for. But it can definitely help. If you are a strong candidate for the position, but the position is competitive, if you can get someone who will refer you, who can potentially even put in a good word for you to the hiring manager, you get a much higher chance for sure. So that's why those building relationships in those target companies, it's so important.
Yes, totally agree. So as a recruiter, you're working with a hiring manager to fill a role. So you either a content strategist or customer success or program management or whatever. Your role as a recruiter is to send over X number of potential screen candidates to the hiring manager as the next stage. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. That's correct. Yeah.
How many people do you think that you will generally talk to? And then how many people do you generally pass on to the hiring manager? And it could differ based on seniority or role. But what are the general ranges that you're working with?
That's a really good question, and it really varies. I'm just trying to think if there's an average. The more junior the position, the more. I'm not really recruiting for entry level roles. I never have. But the more if it's more of a mid level position, you will always receive more applications than if it's a more senior position. Let me just think. I think I would speak, depending on the role. It will be between 10 to 30 candidates for the position. And then sending to the hiring manager, again, it really depends, could be 5, could be 10.
Yeah.
In general, you just want to pass on the best candidates to the hiring manager. Yeah. So if you're passing on 20, you're not doing a very good job as a recruiter. But sometimes they do want to interview a good number of people. But I would say no more than 10. It should be a few of the best candidates to go through it also depends on, is it one position? Is it multiple roles, so that also depends. But let's say if it's one position, I would say 5 to 10 people that I would pass on to the hiring manager. Maximum.
So you're talking to somewhere around 20 candidates to get it down to 5 to 10 to pass on to the hiring manager. So if you're speaking about 20 candidates and you have these 3 different buckets of people where you can be speaking, you can speak to people that are incoming, that posted for the role. You can speak to people that you are actively sourcing, and you can speak to referrals. What sort of mix? And I know it differs on the role and the level of the role, but let's just say for the sake of argument, there's 20 people that you're talking to. How much would be incoming? How much would be you sourcing? And how much would be referrals of that?
Oh, it really varies. There's honestly no rule here whatsoever, because there will be a time when some roles you will have a few referrals, some of them you will have zero referrals, completely zero referrals. So I would say the referrals will be a small part. That will not be more than 10%.
But if you do get referrals, they're a pretty high hit rate.
Yes, of course. Yeah, absolutely. It really depends on the role, because I've had roles where you got several referrals. I've had roles where you get completely zero referrals. I honestly don't think there are any rules here, because there are positions when you are quite lucky and you receive a lot of good applications, and sometimes you don't even have to do the direct sourcing, or maybe you just do a little bit, to have a bigger pool of candidates. But there will be some positions where you receive very few applications. I mean, even just example from Expedia, because I was there the longest. I remember one role for not a senior position. It was marketing coordinator, 250 applications in 2 days, right? So, I just unposted the role because I need to go through them all. Or that finance director I mentioned, I remember there were 176, But then there will be positions when I would only receive 30 applications in total, and most of them are wrong. So it's like people sometimes think, you just get no. It could be actually really quite hard. So sometimes it's 90% of direct sourcing. Sometimes it's 90% of people who apply. It really depends. It really depends on the position, on the location, on the level of the role.
And when you're talking to those 20-ish people, it's kind of irrelevant. By the time you talk to them, you don't really, you've already assessed that they're worth 30 minutes of your time, because you generally speak with them about 30 minutes or so. You tell them a little bit about the role.
That's correct.
You assess their capabilities. At that point, when you're speaking to them, it doesn't matter to you if they came inbound or outbound or through referral at that point.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, maybe what's more important, because when I say I speak to 20, it could be 20 candidates over the period of time, because I will also look at the resume and pick the best resume. So it's not that I'm picking 20 resumes, I'm only passing 5 people. No, because I should know what I'm looking for in the resume. I'm just saying in total, it might be 20 candidates, but I would probably pick a few to start with who look the best, maybe 5 to 10, and then just speak to them and see Again, it depends on the role, because sometimes there will be like a lot of good applications, like with this content role. Sometimes it's a struggle to get any good applications, and you need to go and headhunt people.
You're going to want to get your pen or pencil out and write down SYCK trick number 5, what recruiters are looking for on a resume.
The first thing that employers and recruiters are thinking when they look at your resume is like, okay, does this person have the skills and experience to come in, learn the role successfully, and start contributing quickly? And obviously, the best way to do that is like to see your work experience section, right? So I would really recommend that you spend more time on this section than on any other, making sure that you have some tangible achievements, and making sure that you have the right keywords, the relevant keywords. Like if there is something on the job description that you've done and it's not on your resume, make sure that you add it. Make sure that it's clear to anyone looking at your resume within seconds that you have the skills that they are looking for. I'm also like, if I'm reaching out to candidates, like let's say I'm looking on, LinkedIn, I'm also trying to like figure out what their status is. Like if they've only been in the current position for 3 months, obviously I'm not going to necessarily reach out. If the candidate is contacting me directly, I'll be curious why they're looking so soon. There could be legitimate reasons for that, but in general, it's a bit of a red flag if someone is looking for a new role so soon. If I speak to someone and they say, oh, well, I'm looking for a career progression, but they've only been in the company for 7 months, I'm like, well, that's not a great sign, because it doesn't always happen that quickly. You might be ready, but it just doesn't work that way. And that will be a red flag. Now, I think the most important thing, like, is their most recent experience relevant to the position for which I'm hiring?
Yes.
Then I would say company recognition. And now it depends from company to company, but it's not necessarily that some companies are better than others, although some of them most certainly are. It's purely a matter of how quickly I can assign a frame of reference. So the credibility bit, like, oh, well, you've worked at Amazon, let's say. Then you've probably accustomed to working on projects at scale. Maybe you are at a well-known crash and burn startup. Then you've probably worn many hats and have been running at a sprinter's pace. There are some pretty blatant associations that I can make simply by recognizing a company name. And because recruiters have generally been doing this job for a while, we just notice patterns and trends amongst candidates and certain companies, and then we formulate assumptions as a result. Now, these assumptions, of course, can fail us, but, we're just talking of a resume review. So we are talking of a few, 10 seconds analysis. Now, assigning that frame of reference is obviously more difficult to do when a candidate has only worked for obscure companies I've never heard of. And, if that's the case, like if you maybe work for companies, mention what they are. Like as a candidate, you might just want to mention like one line, what's this company doing, because I don't know all of the industries. And I even with some of my interview coaching clients, like the name is mentioned, never heard of it because it's not my sector. But then when I ask them, and it's like a huge company with 30,000 people, I'm like, mention that, it's important, especially when you look for a role. Like you want them to understand the complexity of what you are doing, the complexity of the organization as well. So also like the overall experience and your story, that's what I'm looking for. Like, is there a career progression? Does this person have increasing levels of responsibility? Do the titles make sense? I mean, if you're a VP of marketing for a 20 people company, that's obviously not the same as being a VP of marketing at Facebook, right? So do the titles and do the responsibilities listed match what I'm looking for? I'm also looking at like what responsibilities you've held. I'm looking at the dates of employment, how long you've been with each employer. Also, try to show progression whenever you can within companies and when changing between companies. So like even if you've received a slight upgrade in a job title with a company, make sure to highlight that. So like, let's say you got promoted from, finance manager to senior finance manager, right? Just make sure that you include that. And then like the overall organization, of course, you want to make sure that, no spelling and grammar mistakes. You may want to make sure that you have, like, you can clearly present ideas. And, if you're in marketing, let's say, and like I've seen people who said they have a great attention to detail, which by the way is one of these cliches that I wouldn't ever bother putting on your resume, but then they have like 2 spelling mistakes in the summary section. I'm like,
they spell attention wrong.
Don't bother. Yeah, exactly. And also the keyword search, does this person have specific experience for the role I'm hiring for? Like, if I'm looking for a JavaScript engineer, then obviously they will need to have that keyword on the resume. And also, gaps, like some people have a career gap, and sometimes I think people worry about having a gap. I personally don't mind gaps as long as there's a sufficient explanation. Maybe you've had 2 years off to raise children, or you've tried raising your own company. That's fine. It's just when you have no explanation of that makes you wonder. If it's a few months, I don't necessarily think you need to explain that because it could take a few months to find a job. But if you've had bigger gaps in the employment, unusual career progression, it's not necessarily a deal breaker, but I would recommend addressing that in a cover letter. And to make your work history as clear as possible, just be upfront about addressing any kind of red flags or unusual moves you've made with the recruiter you're working for, or they just might not be comfortable forwarding your resume to the hiring manager.
Interesting. You mentioned cover letters there, and you also talked earlier where you get sometimes inundated by resumes. I think you talked earlier about an e-commerce role you were looking for. You got 176 applicants. Only 3 had the e-commerce background.
I know.
How did you actually assess? So you get 176 resumes. Are you looking at them very quickly, each of them, and just passing and failing very quickly?
Yeah, it's literally seconds, when you have that many applications. So sometimes people, I think they spend a lot of time. They're like, oh, why do they just spend a few seconds? But, you have to. That's why I think it's our job it's our job. So when we look for a job, that's our job to make it clear that you have the relevant skills. So make sure that you have a clear summary section. Make sure you have some tangible achievements.
Yeah.
Numbers easily impress people. So whenever you have numbers of what you've accomplished, made money, saved money, streamline the procedure, however you can quantify your experience, that's always the better. If there are the specific hard skills mentioned on the job description, make sure that they are included in your summary section or in your core competency section. You just want to make it easy for the recruiter to see that you are potentially worth talking to. Obviously, that's just get you in the door. So also, let's say you're applying for a job, but what the job is looking for is something you've done in your previous job, not so much in your current position. Make sure that information is on page 1 of your resume, right? Make sure that relevant job isn't on page 2 because they might not look at page 2.
Right.
So, just
and will you ever look at a resume that's more than 2 pages?
Yeah, absolutely. I would. It's actually very interesting how this varies from country to country. I personally think 3-4 pages is fine to me. I know people, 2 pages is great if you can. I think if you're very experienced, 3 pages, I think it's absolutely fine. Now, if someone sends me a resume of 4 or 5 pages, okay, I do think it's too long, but if they have relevant experience, I would still look at them 100%. I would really recommend 2 pages for someone experienced. That would be my recommendation. I don't mind 3 pages if they're very experienced, but in some countries, I remember once in South Africa, this guy said it was 11 or 16 pages. It was something completely insane. I couldn't believe actually. They had the number. It was just interesting. They had the number of the social security or their ID. It was just very strange. In some Scandinavian countries, mind you, years ago, I hope they stopped doing that. They would have a name of their wife and dog.
Right,
not a dog,
right. They say if they're married, they have some countries have pictures on it.
Yeah, I know. It's interesting, but to be honest, even though you should not be doing that, I would not discount a candidate based on that if they have relevant experience. I think the presentation is important. Buyers, I know some people are just not very good at doing that. So if they have the relevant skills, unless the resume is really, really bad, then they just need to learn. But if it's okay resume, not amazing, but they actually have the skills, they work for good companies, I would absolutely always consider them.
Check out how to prepare for an interview with SYCK trick number 6. So a big part of your job as a recruiter, talking to the hiring manager, understanding what the key criteria are that the hiring manager is seeking. You're trying to cull that down to a list of 5 or 10 people that the hiring manager can speak to. When you're speaking to those people to cull it down to the 5 to 10, you're talking to them for 30 minutes. Yeah. What are you trying to assess in that 30-minute conversation to quickly make the decision, pass it on to the hiring manager, or fail? You're probably just put in the ATS system and just have a canned response rejection.
Yeah, absolutely. So during that 30 minutes, I'm trying to assess, do they have the relevant skills to do the job? And also, are they motivated? Are they actually really interested in the company? Yes. I'm not necessarily expecting the candidate to do a huge amount of research prior to the recruiter screen. I will not be expecting them to do the same amount of research they would do before the interview with the hiring manager. But if they really know hardly anything about the company, I think that's kind of a bad sign. At least they should have looked at the website. So, in general, with the interview prep, I would always recommend that firstly, you really need to know your resume backwards, forwards, and every angle in between. Really understanding each bullet point on your resume. You want to ideally write out a story or a few examples outlining how you performed or achieved that specific bullet, and being able to succinctly and articulately communicate the story behind each bullet. I would also say, know the numbers on, with every bullet point on your resume, and also information behind the numbers. So, if you really want to impress the interviewer, go even a step further and know how the numbers came about. So, for example, if you've increased the sales by 23%, know what the starting and ending revenue numbers were, which markets contributed to the increase, and what changes you made to get to the increase. And that will be a great way to impress the recruiter as well. Prepare stories about, challenges, failures, difficult situations, because these kinds of questions always come up, not necessarily in the recruiter screen, but they will come up in later interviews. So, of course you want to do research on the company, and, even for the recruiter screen, I would not necessarily be asking, what do you know about our competitors, I would not be asking those questions. I would just want to understand, are they interested in the company? What do they know about us? But in general, when you prepare for interview, don't just look at the website. Like, I would Google the company's name for articles written by third parties. I would just research stories about the company on like Forbes or, Huffington Post or any industry publications. I would look at YouTube. I actually remember once I interviewed with a company. It was for a sales recruiter role, and I've watched the videos where the CEO was talking about like the future of the business. And there was another one about the product. I actually stopped the video and I made notes because I wanted, and then when I spoke to the VP of sales, the feedback was later, he was super impressed that I actually understood how the product works, So yeah, there's a lot of, I would look at YouTube, I would look at the social media, look at like, Glassdoor, what's said about the firm, about employees. I would look at the, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, like what are they talking about? And also I would research the interviewer ideally, look at them on LinkedIn, look for possible conversation points and common interests, like if there's anything you've seen, like maybe they attended a professional conference or they wrote an article. If it's something you can just create a really good impression if you've seen, like you really like the article on whatever, right? Also, like research the position, and that will be very important for the recruiter screen. Like you really want to be able to sell yourself and prepare examples of how you have performed or like would perform each aspect listed on the job description.
Yes.
And like write down these points as a preparation for the interview. Like I don't think you need to write down the whole answer, but I would just suggest crafting some examples on paper rather than just thinking about them, because that will help to organize your thoughts. And the first time you come up with your examples should not be during the actual interview, So you want to write it out and practice saying those points. So for the recruiter screen, like, the company research, the right motivation, why you're interested in the company, and just doing some like, why are you the best person for this position?
Yep.
What have you done? Like, how is your experience matching the requirements of the position? You want to show some enthusiasm for the role and for the company. I remember once when I was working for VMware and I've asked this candidate also, why VMware? And this guy just knew so much about the project. That was VMware France. And he knew so much about the projects that VMware in France was working on. He knew a lot of people in the industry. I mean, I didn't know about these things, but he knew. So I'm like, okay, that's a great impression. So,
demonstrate the research and the interest in the role and the company. Yeah, and even if it's not your top company, you need to also market yourself.
Absolutely.
As that.
Well, that's the whole thing, like every interview is a good practice. So maybe you are interviewing, maybe that's not your dream job, but that's fine. Still do a little bit of prep. Like, I'm not saying you have to spend 5 hours preparing for the recruiter interview. I definitely wouldn't, but surely you can spend 20 minutes, right? Just making some notes and doing some research. So yeah, absolutely.
SYCK trick number 7, what not to do in a job search. So I have 3 more questions for you. You gave a lot of great SYCK advice on what people should do. Are there some things that people should not do that's a waste of their time or not a good use of their energy?
Yeah, well, I would just say for any job seeker, don't just rely on job boards, because unfortunately, so many people, they just rely on job boards. And it could honestly, I'm not saying you can't find a job from a job board. I found jobs from job boards, from LinkedIn. You absolutely can. But the problem is, if that's your only method of job search, you could be looking for a job for a very long time, because you are just commodity. Applying as well, one of the many other candidates applying for the position. By the time you apply, they could be on a final interview stage. Yep. So I would just say, like, be a lot more proactive about your career, create a list of target companies, connect with decision makers, with recruiters, use agencies, like basically use more than one method of looking for a job, because honestly, otherwise it could just be taking a very long time. So that I would say is a waste of time. Just spending your time on job boards and being super passive and not talking to people. That would be one of the biggest mistakes.
Yeah, I think being proactive, being direct with your approach, creating that target list of companies, building that network out, because even though it sounds like you don't get tons of referrals for every job, when you do get those referrals, they're usually like you do pay attention to each one of them.
Absolutely. Of course. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Well, Margaret, you dropped so much SYCK advice here, and you gave lots of great inside information, and you have tons of experience across all these different companies. The interesting thing is they're very similar. It's not like recruiting is this black box. People think that it is, but you help to reveal a lot of insight there, and I appreciate that. The last 2 questions I have for people on the SYCK podcast is, first, any final SYCK advice you have for our audience here, for people that want to accelerate their career, get more interviews, get more opportunities, earn more money? Any final SYCK advice and wisdom you have?
Yeah, I mean, I would say just get support in the areas you don't feel strong in, because I think all of us have areas where we're good, and we maybe just need to watch a free webinar and we'll be fine. And there are areas when we just need some support, So if you find yourself that you've had several unsuccessful interviews, you're not getting much traction with your job search, get some support. I'm not even saying from me as an interview coach, just get some support in the areas that you need help in. Because just to give you one example, I've had one client who had 40 unsuccessful interviews before she came to me. She actually got the job straight after the session because her interview technique was, that's not a normal result, but the point is her interview technique was really quite poor, hence she wasn't getting the interviews and it wasn't difficult to improve, right? So she got the job straight after the session, but look how much time she wasted. She wasted months. So I think in general, if you are not getting traction with your job search, just get some help. It could be help with your resume. I even remember many years ago when I was at the start of my career, I thought my resume was fine, but obviously I didn't know anything, right? Because I literally knew nothing at that stage. And then, I spent like months on not very successful job search. I was getting somewhere, but not great. And then someone actually reviewed my resume, gave me some feedback, and I started getting so many more interviews. And I wasted so much time. And that's actually when I've learned, get a coach, get some help, because I wasted months and look how much what I've wasted in potentially my earnings, because I could have been working a lot sooner. So that's what I would say, get some support in the areas. Like if you're not getting any traction, get some support.
Awesome. And the last question I have, how can people reach out to you? I found you, but how can other people find you and reach out and connect with you?
So firstly, I think there's only one Margaret Buj. It's B-U-J, J for John, on LinkedIn. So feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn and send me a connection request. I have over 70, different job search articles on LinkedIn as well that you can have a look at. But also I have a website called interview-coach.co.uk. So feel free to have a look at that. I have a lot of free job search resources and articles there as well.
Awesome. And I've seen some of your YouTube videos and they're really informative. It taught me some things as well.
Oh, yeah. YouTube as well. Yes. And YouTube as well. Margaret Buj, B-U-J.
Yeah. Awesome, Margaret. Well, I appreciate all the time. I've really valued getting to know you and build our relationship over the course of the last several months, and look forward to continuing having conversations with you and learning from you and really helping to accelerate my career and helping accelerate careers of others that are listening here.
No, likewise. I've learned a lot from you as well. And thank you so much for inviting me onto your podcast.
Well, thank you so much, Margaret, for joining Alan for today's episode. And a very special thanks to you, our listeners. Be sure to connect with Alan at SYCKpodcast.com. That's SYCK. On the website, click that link that says Kadima Careers Accelerator Newsletter. You're going to find a lot of information with that. And Alan, you've got some great video links on the site. Can you share some details with what's going on the website?
Yeah, so we've been pretty active posters on our Kadima Careers YouTube channel, and you can check that out. We just put up a recent webinar that Margaret and I did, where we share all the secrets of how to land more interviews at the world's top tech companies. So check out our Kadima Careers YouTube channel, subscribe, and you'll get some awesome content there.
Awesome. You can see it all at SYCKpodcast.com. Once again, it's SYCK. Hey, we hope you've enjoyed this episode with Margaret, and you're going to love the next one.